Hi, Joshua. Welcome to the podcast. Let's start by hearing about your journey into tech and what led you to your current position at Verizon.
Great question. Thanks. I think there are a few things. I think I'm one of the unique ones where it was more of an accidental into tech. Although I did start off, I was a young data miner in finance, so it's not like it was completely out of left field. But over time, growing up in a wireless company, you get really good at routing, you get really good at switching, you get really good at carrier grade networking. But then I wanted to move closer more and more into software and I love IoT because that's where I've spent most of my career. It has really been about building new business models and or helping people do what they do better by adding a little bit of intelligence on a small device so that they can do cool things. But yeah, so it's been a long road.
How many years have you been with Verizon now?
So I started when I was 11. It's been 26 years that I've been at Verizon. We've the cool thing about our job is that people aren't connecting less things to the internet. So we might be working with a car manufacturer one day and then a dog collar company that's got GPS tracking. Historically, I was a little bit more on the industrial side with distribution networks with utilities, oil and gas pipelines, ensuring that they had safety and security networks, everything from cathodic protection down to the connected oil drilling equipment, which is a different world, but everybody was super smart and super kind there, working hard. And so you learn a lot and you grow up really fast when you're working with all of these people who have so much experience. It's been a blast.
Awesome. Awesome. So I think the first topic I'd like to dig into with you is around innovation at Verizon around G and this IoT division that you're really focused on. So you've been at the forefront of these G deployment. Can you share some of the most exciting innovations that you're seeing emerge specifically due to these new capabilities around G and Internet of Things?
Right. I have a feeling that's a little bit like 4G, right? So that when 4G was rolled out, we didn't know TikTok and Instagram were going to be created. However, fundamentally, they had to have a different type of network to be able to do that. We're in that same space of 5G right now, to where some of the things we know are no-brainers, right? Like fixed wireless access for either remote machines in the IoT space or fixed wireless access for a branch of a bank or of a pharmacy. We're going to have more and more of this. It's about to speed up really quickly, right? So it's not just going to be your automobile that's going to have a 5G connectivity, but it will be applications that require CV. And let's say you want to keep your device costs down on your camera and compute on site. So you're going to run some ML code there, but you'll also need to run relatively nearby, something with more horsepower so that your inference server can be closer to you so you can keep the BOM cost down on your equipment. And so you're going to see anything automotive is going to be first, then robotic and delivery is going to be second. And then you're going to start seeing these drones and computer vision, and then a mixture of all of those, right? Because delivery robots are already doing all of that on board, and then sometimes with nearby compute.
So this whole world of transportation, whether it's self-driving cars or logistics and shipping, is going to really benefit from having this compute that's on the edge, that's closer and more responsive in real time.
Yes, and that's we're going to see that at like the low power use cases, right? And so as chipset prices go down, we can fundamentally connect more things. And at the same time, we're building these bigger, faster, stronger networks, right? That are going to require more bandwidth. The applications themselves can become latency dependent, that especially in like smart grids, right? You've got to be able to make decisions in milliseconds. And so you're going to have this paradigm where it starts with low latency and high. You may not even need high capacity, but you need low latency. And then we're also going to see we need high capacity, but latency is fine. And so you're starting to see us being able to tune the network per the application. So if you're just a water meter that needs to chirp, we've got something that's going to help you save your battery, and then some strategies and some things that we've invested in the network to make those batteries last. And then we also have, hey, let's go stream broadband TV, directly from the camera live, and have a great picture and great experience for the end users.
Yeah, it really sounds like there's this invisible world that is powering our lives that we aren't aware of, but it's ever present and it's helping deliver these great experiences.
Well, and that means it's working, right? So like if it feels closer to magic and you can't see it, then you know it's awesome. However,
Yeah,
it's highly engineered
yeah.
to work well for all these different use cases. But yes, that's a good thing.
Yeah. So, from your point of view, what are some of the key challenges that developers face when working with IoT connectivity? And how do you think Verizon's API design is set up to address some of these challenges?
Right. So I kind of take that in three different buckets, right? So the first one is scale, and good, bad, or indifferent. If anybody's changed their family rate plan with whoever their carrier is, it's not always easy. So imagine trying to do that with 10,000 devices or 100,000 devices. So everything my team does, and then everything our developers do, is really around, and the product team for that matter, is really to design for scale. Traditionally, IoT has required lower margins both for us and our customers. And so we have to automate these transactions so that the business model actually holds up. So scale is one of them. Being able to activate 10,000 devices or deactivate 10,000 devices with a single API call starts to really make sense. The second thing where APIs really, really come into place is really around the remoteness of the nature of machines and IoT, which is in the oil and gas world, you might have a router that's sitting out there doing something very important that's 6 hours away from the nearest human. And so you need to understand the state of the network. You need to understand the state of the device. And then, having alerts. And all of these things are API driven now. And then same thing with cars, right? So if a car has Wi-Fi in it and you've got to push, critical gigabyte update, well, I needed at some point, you can't wait for Wi-Fi anymore, and you've just got to push it over the wireless network. And so there are strategies and APIs that we can do to help them understand what's the best time to be able to do these things. And then lastly is security. So we've got, scale, remote, and then security. Everything from locking down SIMs to layering in all the pieces that we know about devices, right? So your chipset's got to be secure. Every stack on your device has to be secure. And then the SIM's got to be locked down. And then depending on the nature of the data, do we put it in a private APN? Do you pin up your own tunnels? What are the best strategies to really make it work for everybody? And we try to do all of that with just APIs as well. And some of those strategies, they affect the others, right? So ensuring, like when we launch something like SIM Secure, so that the SIM is ever removed out of a device and put into another one, they don't have access to your private network. I think the first iteration is, we sign them all up and you're good. Well, you just added another 1,000 devices. Okay, now we got to go back in and do that 1,000 more times. And so over time, we have the opportunity to, you know, grow the services and ensure that they keep up with the scale that people need.
Yeah. So it really sounds like your APIs have grown from this necessity that you couldn't actually support these use cases if a human had to drive out and manage all of these connections, or you had to have a person on the phone at Verizon manually activating and deactivating lines. This is all unlocking a lot of use cases that weren't possible in the past, right?
Percent. So everything we do for scale. So there are 7 people on my team, and I always want us to be able to act like 70, and that means that we have to teach our customers how to correctly scale their services. I think we only have 15 APIs, but it's over 300 endpoints, and so it gets highly nuanced because you're not just turning up You're not turning up the exact same server every time. There's this dynamic nature of wireless technology. And then as things progress and things change in their customers' hardware or their applications, you've got to take a lot of that into consideration when you're building these things.
Yeah. So how is Verizon leveraging this edge computing in conjunction with G and IoT, and like how is this impact the developer experience and the types of applications that you're seeing built?
So I think we're still early in this space. In fact, Verizon partnered with AWS and we've got wavelength zones together that actually sit in the Verizon network. And it's one of those things where we all know it makes sense because we know applications are going to matter for latency. However, I think there was a bit of delay in developers understanding that this is available to them. I was speaking to a drone company a couple of months ago and they were actually aware of it, right? Now what they did know real well was the all the physics that come into a wireless network while flying a drone, right? So we were able to help them there. But they understood the power of edge computing. And I think we're really going to get to this blended space. Because if you talk to some people, edge computing is on the device itself. If you talk to us, it's really the edge of the network. And then if you talk to others, it's some made up place and everything's the edge. So what I really think we're going to be doing is it's going to be a sliding scale of which portion of your application is going to live where, and where's the most intelligent place to put each piece. Because the more compute you put on your hardware, their BOM goes up. However, TinyML has come a long way over the past, 5 to 7 years, and it's truly remarkable now to where a company can run a TinyML model, on the sensor itself and not even in the EEPROM or other memory locations that take battery life. So we're starting to see all these different areas that are really starting to become interesting. And it's going to be kind of this long chain of, for this device and this business model, I need most of it here, or I need very little of it here. I need more horsepower here. And then in the far cloud, that's where the really, the training and all those super heavy duty workloads are still going to live. And I think if we the easiest way to understand it, I think, is if we look at the smart grid, right? And so, you've got these transformers, you've got these distribution networks that are massive, and then you're going to start having people putting energy back onto the grid, right? And so, with solar and wind coming up on private properties, they're actually putting it back onto the grid. And so, even if the electric company shuts down a portion of the line, there still might be electricity feeding the line. And so they've got to be exactly aware of everything that's plugged in to their grid because it's going to be this new world where energy is going to be coming from everywhere. And then if you start to think that we haven't really figured out how to transport electricity much better than we did, 50 years ago, the only thing that's really going to change is intelligence. And so all these really, really bright people figured out how to transport energy for us. We turn on our lights, we're completely safe doing that. But what those people need is more information. And so you're going to see more and more devices that live inside the grid, providing more and more feedback. And then you're going to need, some of them are going to have different profiles. So some of them are going to be low latency. I've got to get the packet out and I need assurance that it's going to go out. Then you're also going to need, here's just a whole bunch of streaming data that's going to be coming your way. It can be a little latent. It's more for my data scientists to go through it at some point. But when you start making these decisions in milliseconds about where you're routing power and what devices need to do, that's when you kind of start to see the capabilities of 5G and nearby compute and increase overall connectivity to the grid. That's really going to kind of start to harness and orchestrate all of these things that are coming together right now.
Wow. It's just an exciting world. I mean, when you talk about, ML on devices and smart grids and drones, is there anything you haven't touched on today that you think, you're hearing, you get feedback, you talk to your customers a lot, you're hearing what developers are excited about. Is there any other opportunities that we haven't, touched on today that you think is kind of interesting or future forward?
That's a great question. I think there's always going to be opportunities because really smart people are going to have really good ideas that that had different experiences, and so they're just going to think creatively and different. And we're going to be here to help them, right? So we're going to have silly connected things. We're going to have educational connected devices. I think AR, VR is still in its infancy. We hear about it all the time, but it's going to be absolutely massive. I just think the hardware is not quite there yet, and the networks are getting there to be able to support that and in the manner in which those applications desire to be treated is going to be the key portion of it, right? And I'm trying to think. Like my daughter has a little watch that's connected. It's and a little gizmo so we can see where she is in GPS, and everything is going to be connected. I think sports is still vastly underrated from a opportunity standpoint. I think it's going to leave the professional soccer pitches or football pitches, and it's going to become more prevalent in our lives. Yeah. I always used to joke that I could connect your water bottle to the internet, but are you going to pay me to do it? Right? Like, so as prices go down on modules and they continue to do so, people are going to think of these really, really cool ideas that make our lives better.
Yeah. So it sounds like a combination of creative ideas and economies of scale coming
Right.
together to make business sense for people
Right.
to create new
100%.
experiences. Yeah.
Right. Like I've got a little system that waters my peppers when I'm gone, right? But I'm not going to productize it, right? It's just a fun thing to do. And we'll have somebody who is a hobbyist that's going to think of something really cool that people are going to find value, and there's actual business model around it that that's going to come through. And with AI getting better and better at writing software, it's going to be easier and easier for that hobbyist or that garage genius to build something that makes money.
Yeah. Very cool. So I'd like to shift gears. This is the developer experience podcast, and our art of developer experience. And API-Matic is nice enough to help put this together. So I wanted to dive into Verizon and how they've partnered with API-Matic, and maybe you could elaborate a bit on the goals around the partnership.
So this is an easy one. So at the end of the day, we want happy developers, right? And we want interactions with our developers either in person or online to have as little friction as possible for them to be able to find what they want, how they want it, and us present it in an easy manner. If you notice, we're a little bit different than an ISV. We aren't installing massive databases. I mean, we do behind the scenes for everything to work, but that's not our offer to the market. And so our developers are just like everybody else's developers, but our APIs are different. There's typically a thing attached to it. And so the overall goal is to be able to serve our developers in a modern way that makes sense. I want to say that API Matic's done a great job of understanding our needs and our developers and then tweaking it until we feel like we've got it in.
Yeah. And
Well, one other thing.
yeah,
So that's the
sure.
kind of the customer facing side. The other side of this is that we have to live with things, right? We've got to have our own CI/CD pipeline of getting stuff updated to market. And so when you're talking about 300 different endpoints, that's a lot when we're pushing code every 2 weeks, that's a lot of updates and new features to be done. So being able to have the front shiny world look great, it's not, I don't feel like we're making sausage on the back end, right? I feel like it's nice and orderly. We've been able to fit it into our operational framework so that it's not painful to make updates. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So whenever your product and engineering teams are making those improvements or adding functionality on the API side of things, it can automatically flow into the front end so the developers are using the latest, greatest documentation that reflects your real API.
On a daily and weekly basis, right? So when we get the markup document from engineering, that's when our work starts, and then that's when our tech writer gets it all flowing and gets it updated at the next release point.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm curious, what were some of the considerations that led Verizon to choose API-Matic as a partner when it came to enhancing your DX for your APIs?
I think there are a few things that a modern development site should have, right? your DX should have a search. This is less on the platform, more on us, but you've got to have the business value described in the API. And then you have to go in deeper on the click, right? So that there's value for the developer. And this is how we look at a lot of things. This is how we do our developer days, is that we start off with what the why for the business side, and then we get into the technology for the developers so that whoever joins our developer days gets everything they want. And you want that for your developer site specifically. You want a code sandbox or a playground that's actually able to be used and worked on. And then I think one of the things that I'm most happy about with API-matic are the SDKs and different languages. And so being able to meet the developer where they are in their paradigm. So if they're a Python developer, they're good to go. We've got everything they need on our site to be able to do that. I'm not a C# developer. I'm more Java and Python. And so, I mean, code's code. You can read it and get it, but that's not what I spend my time doing. But all of those people are taken care of, and thank God they don't need to call me for anything like that. So API-matic checked a lot of those boxes of what should you have, and here's how to do it.
Yeah, I've been in that position before where you've got a variety of languages that your developer community want to engage in, and they'll come to you and they'll want to share some examples, or they'll want you, they not so much debug your code, but like if they're running into issues, like they've got code they've written from scratch and you just kind of hold them off because you don't want to get into that position of debugging their code.
Well, we can't, right? It'd be great if we had that service, but we just don't scale enough to be able to do that. And so the more tools we give our developers, the better off they're absolutely going to be. And our developers are slightly different, right? Because we have a whole bunch of 3GPP standards and a little bit of Verizon magic dust, kind of all behind the scenes making, this wireless world work. And the more we can abstract that from the developer experience and just have a clean high-level API with great documentation and code samples. And then now we've even added our own little AI agent. Almost everything somebody needs is there, right? And if they need a little extra help, they can always call us.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm wondering if you could walk me through what a typical journey for a developer integrating with Verizon's APIs now, and maybe how that differed before you had the partnership. What was that developer onboarding experience like?
So onboarding is always a discussion forever, and I think it will be for every developer group. And we do have a path for new developers. They go and put a credit card, they can buy some SIMs with some data and get going. And they have access to the documentation. Most of our developers have a big relationship with Verizon, or they sign a contract with us, and they get access to a little bit more. One of the first things, our original documentation was very flat. So it was very easy to search with a control F, but it didn't have the texture that you needed for some of these experiences, right? So now we have one of our engineers, not on the DevRel team, meet with a customer, go them through the platform, because we're both a platform and an API platform. They'll walk them through the platform and then say, oh yeah, everything that's available here is available via API. And the customers has developers and they want to do it. Then that's when my team gets engaged. And once they actually get onboarded, then we've got 1 million videos out there posted on the site and on YouTube to get them started. And then when they run into a problem or come into a, tertiary problem at that point, reach out to us. We're going to be there to help you. Our typical walkthroughs have kind of changed lately. So one of the greatest ones was we had a large customer come to us. It was a Python developer. He just needed just a little bit of help. One of my engineers said, "Oh, that's great. Listen, we've got this SDK over here in Python. Over here, we got the code sandbox or the playground that you can use. And then, oh yeah, we've got an AI assistant right down here." And so literally the engineer walked the customer, showed him the SDK, grabbed some code in the playground, and then went down to the AI assistant to build a page. And the AI assistant just built him a page. And there was so little friction. And actually, It can be a really short phone call, but but that idea of getting to OK 200, right, it's always kind of that directional goal for all of us, right? Like how fast can we get to 200 with these people? It's a little hard to track with what we do because of the nature of our business, but it's the time to 200 is much faster now, and we can actually, when they're on there looking at documentation, they can get to 200 on the same page, right? So they can test the code live and see it work, see the JSON, see the HTTP, whatever it is they want to see. Their Tomcat server, they can turn on the Java. Like we're good.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely sounds like there's several stages that your customers go through where they see more of an interface that they can interact with the network.
Right.
And then if APIs are part of their business plan, then they bring in their developers and they go down that path as well.
And there are. So if we look at the customer journey, there's some contractual stuff that we've got to get done first. And then we'll typically have a kickoff call with them on kind of getting started. And then we'll walk them through, our OAuth. And then it's going to start with the blocking and tackling, right? Activation, deactivation, all those typical telco things. And then we'll take them through some more of the advanced stuff, like where's my device based on network information? What's the health of my device? How's the cell site doing where my device is? And some of those are more advanced conversations that take a little bit longer to get to because we still have to do the blocking and tackling. They still got to get set up on being able to manage things and being able to manage the relationship with Verizon. But then after that, we want them to have the best run practice that they can possibly have. And a lot of time is you need metadata from the network, you need metadata from the devices in order to lower your support and operational costs along the way. So that's typically how it goes. We normally talk to them a couple times. First time is just getting them up and running. And then the second time is, okay, here are the cool things that you can do. And here's why it's going to be important to you.
Yeah. And the partnership with API-matic has been going for definitely over 2 years. I'm not sure if we hit the third year mark yet. What are some plans? Are there plans to expand the scope of the partnership between Verizon and API-matic in the future that you can talk about?
That's a great question. So I think there are a few things that go into this. One, several different groups inside of Verizon are developing APIs. And so on one hand, we have this great thing that APIs are being thought of at the inception of applications and or solutions, which traditionally has just kind of been held to the IoT teams. So that entire idea of adding APIs is really important. And then I think the second thing is we've had a great experience with API-matic. It's working with us, working with a telco is a little bit different than working with an ISP. And it's because of all of the intricacies and complexities that we have as how we grew up as a business. And API took the time to actually learn our business and learn what our developers cared about, and learned, what is that developer journey across the way. It's like what APIs, the old 80-20, what's the most important first, and let's get those dialed in, and okay, let's dial in everything else. And that was a long process. Not too terribly long, but I think the way API actually listened and worked with us to get it done is what really kind of differentiated along the way and kept us happy. I think there's always more to do. Like I said earlier, these are living, breathing things that are always going to be discussed and talked about and tweaked. And I think one of the newest things is the sample applications that we're talking about doing together, so that that customers can come in and they may just need it internally. They don't necessarily even need it on an external website. And so let's have the code there for them, right? Let's reduce their struggles and time. And then as Verizon grows our API set, hopefully there's more and more platforms that API-matic can be a part of.
Yeah, it sounds like at Verizon, your APIs are being treated as products more and more and thought of in those terms.
Yes. I spoke with Christoph, and this idea of, is an API a product? Is it not a product? I think the answer is it can be both. right? In some instances, depending on what they're doing, the API itself is the product. If you want to go through the idea of a product and, well, what you're really selling is information, I'm like, okay, that's fine. But it's definitely accessed via an API. And so that's fine. And then other things, the APIs are not the product, but they're the delivery method for the actual product. And so I'm comfortable either way people look at it. I think some are definitely more products than others, but we'd spend a whole podcast just talking about his API product.
Yeah, I think there are definitely some books that are coming out that are really pushing that message. And it probably resonates for a lot of people and a lot of companies, but isn't a one size fits all. I'm curious if we can shift gears again and look towards the future of the telecom API space. I'm wondering from your perspective, what are some of the most significant trends that you think are shaping telcos and APIs right now?
I don't know if I have strong opinions. I've got opinions on everything. But I think traditionally what has driven APIs and telcos has been the Internet of Things, right? It's really been around these business models of scale so that um, people could do these massive, large rollouts. And so in that case, the business model was the thing that we were fulfilling, right? What's going to change that are going to be the metadata from the network itself. If it can be presented in a secure way that's acceptable to customers, that's the next thing, right? And you got to be very careful with that. But if we want to build new and differentiated APIs that aren't necessarily connected to a thing that you own, so we call mobile devices UEs. Uh, if you don't own the UE, is there value in the for the person who does to allow you to use certain aspects of their data? And I think most of it is going to be around security and fraud detection, right? So one of the oldest APIs out there is, number verification. So we all see it with our banks. All right, this is the number we have for you on record. Can you answer the text message? Right? Can you hit yes, or can you type in the code we just sent you? So that's been around forever. It makes sense to the market. It resonates with software developers, and that's just going to continue to grow. That's not gonna really shrink, right? And then if we start thinking, hey, let's take that model right there, the number verification model. What are the other things that we can do in novel ways that make sense to software developers, and actually make sense to the telcos, and make sense for the end users for us to supply those services? And it's going to be pretty cool pretty soon. I think we could probably push code faster than it would be adopted, right?
Okay.
Um, and so I think it's still early. So telcos have had this latent capability of doing these things. Just the majority of them haven't gone full bore into pushing this idea that the metadata of the network or the user in some way, shape, or form delivered securely, because we're all heavily regulated, is going to be a new business model on the side, right?
Yeah. Interesting. So when you talk about security and your network and identity in a way, with their phone number being part of your identity, I'm just trying to think, like, I hear about a lot of concern with AI and voice verification and fraud detection around that. Is that something that everyone's going to have to build on their own, or is that something you think telcos might enable for businesses?
That's a great question, and probably a little too detailed. I think the companies all understand APIs, or all understand AI is important to them. Like, everybody understands that. Our developers are already developing with a buddy, and Microsoft and everybody else is doing it too. The next stage of that is, how do we not use those AI companions, but how do we start infusing applications with AI and ML? And then how do we build them to help with the fraud, right? So we are we're already doing that. There have been studies around AI listening to phone calls from a with a customer support agent on the line. And the AI is very good, very, very good at detecting fraud in like the first minute of the phone call. Because of the words that they choose, the tone in which they speak, all of these things start to yell, hey, you can get screen pop for your customer service rep that, hey, fraud is likely a fraud call. Someone's, you know, trying to pull a Kevin Mitnick on you, right?
Yeah.
And so
We
we're going to have a whole host of these. I don't want to call them microservices because they aren't small, but we're going to have these point services that will be available to help continually combat fraud because fraudsters are always a step ahead. They're really bright people and they know what they're doing. Nefarious or not, they're typically pretty bright people trying to figure out new ways.
New ways to make a dollar.
Right. Right.
Yeah. I guess a question that I'd like to hear your perspective on, because from the end consumer perspective, you've got Verizon, but then you've also got other big telco brands, and they always seem to be competing for customers. I imagine APIs can be a differentiator when you get into the business arena. Are there things that you see that differentiate you from other telecom providers?
Um, I think what is unique about us, and I always sing the praises of our developers. But like with my team being intertwined with these large customers who use a lot of Verizon services, they can have a new idea for an API, right? Or a new service. My team is highly experienced, so they have ideas all the time. The product team has new ideas. And we can actually take a customer request, bring it back into the product machine. And I've seen us push out code within a month for, something new that makes sense, not only for this customer, but for others. Now, that's not every time, right? Because we've got to have product capital and all of those things, but it is capable. And so I think one thing that's unique about us is that we do own our own platform. We push code and updates every 2 weeks to it. It's an incredibly well run, tight machine. And we iterate really well. Now, there are those times in which you're tackling larger, I don't even want to say problems, but larger tasks that are going to require a year's worth of work and a lot of, capital dollars to do it. But I think it's the level at which we constantly improve on things and tweak to make it better for the customer. A lot of times coming directly from customer asks. It's not even a new product. It's just, hey, can I get this exact same thing, but I need it to look this way, and here's why. And you're like, that makes so much sense. And guess what? That's better on our systems. So you just incentivized us to build it for you. So, it's not always that easy. But, when you've been doing this for 10 years and you've got a lot of the same developers, you get really, really, your CI/CD pipeline becomes really smooth.
Yeah. It definitely sounds like you're wearing that developer advocate hat and advocating for customers and developers internally, which is part of the job that maybe people don't think about, but that can really influence the developer experience because you're talking to those developers who are customers.
Right. That's hard to measure, right? It's hard to find value in that. But I think the customers at the end of the day, it does strengthen that relationship between the two entities. And it's just, it's a great story. It's hard to always, pinpoint a value on it, but our customers typically feel like they're being heard. Now, sometimes it doesn't preclude us from ever having grown up conversations with saying, hey, there is a system limitation to do it this way. Can you please do it this way? And 9 times out of 10, those are fine. But we all have to have grown up conversations sometimes. Sid.
Yeah. So I'd love to wrap up our conversation with the topic of standards and this new standard, Camara. There's a lot of talk, a lot of buzz about it. Maybe for our listeners who aren't plugged into the telco world, could you explain what this is about and why this is gaining momentum?
So a few years ago, this idea, it's kind of called the Camara APIs or standards. They're not truly standards, but let's call it really good guidance on API structures around specific use cases and functions inside of the wireless world. And so some of those APIs we were talking about earlier, um, what if the telcos had a standard API language and format and structure for some of the things you're going to be doing a whole lot? And we touched on one of them, one of the big ones, which is fraud. Yet several tier one carriers are actively investing in it across the globe. I've been on a few of the standards calls, and so the standards are being developed. Those don't happen overnight, but you know, it's a little bit easier in the API world to design a standard with open API and all that stuff than it is designing the relationship between a UPC and other wireless infrastructure. So it's easy compared to what we normally do. But there's a new JV that we just announced with Ericsson, and Verizon's invested as well, called Aduna. And that's really going to kind of be the hub for helping push these API standards and get them out in the world. And I think one of the things that you would see is that instead of having, you might be using some of these APIs from an API aggregator. It might be with a cloud provider. Now under the hood, it's Verizon, or under the hood, it's one of our competitors. But fundamentally, the API structure is going to be really same and executed the same. And I think it's gonna make sense for some industries first, and then other industries later as the API set grows. So it's gonna make a ton of sense for banking, right? Anything we can do to help with fraud. It's gonna be a win for everybody involved. And then I think as time moves on, the API set will grow and it'll make more and more sense in different industries as well.
Yeah. And is Verizon going to be adopting these standards inside of your API strategy?
We are. So we are actively investing and working and building on Camara standardized APIs. It's a little bit different than my set of developers. My developers are typically attached to a thing or a service. Think more people who are building for mobile phones. What if I was a video streaming company and my customer paid me for a concert ticket that they want to stream live? Well, I want them to have the best experience, right? So built into my pricing model is the ability for me to add some quality of service, or quality on demand. So what if I were able to send Verizon an API, or any carrier an API, and say, hey, for the next 2 hours while Sid's watching this concert, don't drop packets on the stream, um, and that's where you're the type of stuff that's down the road that I would say is within the realm of reality of being out there. And there are some fundamental things that the 5G networks have to have enabled to be able to do that. I would say those investment strategies are already there for everybody. And so then it will just be this business model of, hey, I need this. And so when you start stacking up these different things like fraud, quality on demand, and I imagine there'd be 50 different APIs, because so many mathematicians have studied the numbers, so they're getting really good at detecting it. And then there are ways that we'll be able to reinforce some of those and help them from a different angle than they've been able to help for in the past. And I think the standards are going to be big. However, that's not going to preclude carriers from building differentiated APIs still. So they may stay to the Camara structure, but perhaps it's only offered by carrier A, B, or C.
Interesting. So that in that example, like quality on demand, so you've got 50,000 people who want to stream, or 100,000 people want to stream this concert for the next 2 hours. They're all on different carriers. And so having a consistent standard means that your API, you're just building to not one API, but the data
Pretty
structures.
close.
Yeah, you're pretty close, just maybe different base URL, but like you're communicating in the exact same way. You aren't having to transform your packages into different formats for different carriers. That could be a nightmare
Your scheme is
for a
always going to be
developer.
the same. All of it's
Yep.
the same. Right.
Okay.
And so then And so let's take that a little bit further, right? So now we've got these developers with these standard set of APIs. Well, what do developers do? Right, well, they're going to post their code to GitHub, providing it's, they're part of that world. They'll post it, and then, you know, toolings, someone's going to create a tool because they need to test certain things, and then, you know, all of this stuff is going to grow, right? So GitHub will have more around mobile APIs, and then developers will have better tools to understand the nature of wireless networks and why certain things are important. And you don't ever get an IP address magically, right? You don't ever have really good service and ever drop a packet magically. And so there are some of these underlying things and underlying ideas that developers are going to have to understand kind of in this new world. But as much as we can abstract that away from them, then they're going to be successful, right? So if you're developing for Android, there's always a wait function, right? Every API has a wait because you're waiting on a promise, right? And so what if we can start to lower those needs and requirements because we've got 5G networks and we've got quality on demand where you're part of a special slice for the next 2 hours and get delivered a really cool experience, whatever that experience may be.
Yeah. That's really cool. Really interesting stuff. Well, I just want to say thanks for joining me today and educating me on Verizon and the telecom space and the future and all the magic that's happening without me really even being aware of all the work that you guys are doing in the industry to make my life that much better.
No, it was my pleasure, Sid. And so, yeah, we're always here for you guys, just like y'all are always here for us. So we appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to some of the future work that we can do together on the developer experience side for Verizon and your developer community and customers. And have a great weekend.
Awesome. Thanks, you too.